What made Lustig effective wasn't just boldness or creativity. His genius lay in understanding fundamental principles of human behavior. He knew people respond to authority without questioning deeply. He understood that scarcity drives urgent decisions, and he recognized that when someone believes they're getting an advantage, like Poisson thought by bribing an official, they're less likely to scrutinize the situation. These same principles, authority, scarcity, and reciprocity, form the backbone of all successful deception. Whether it's a 1920s con man selling a national monument, a modern social media influence campaign, or a covert intelligence operation, Lustig simply understood what makes people tick, then subtly manipulated those psychological triggers. The ethics of deception. When lies save lives, those unchanging cognitive vulnerabilities don't just make us targets. They've been weaponized to win wars and preserve peace. During WWII's darkest hours, British intelligence created an entirely fictional officer named Major William Martin, complete with family photos, theater tickets, and love letters, a deception so meticulous it diverted Nazi divisions from Sicily and potentially saved thousands of Allied lives. Where exactly does this kind of lie fall on our moral compass? The ethics of deception. Resist simple categorization. We can't categorize all lies as wrong or all truths as right. Deception exists on a spectrum where context, intention, and outcomes shape its moral standing. The same psychological principles that enable harmful fraud can, under different circumstances, save nations and protect the innocent. When does a lie become a lifeline? Consider how we evaluate deception across various domains. When Houdini performed his water torture cell escape, audiences understood they were witnessing an illusion. This transparency transforms the deception. We consent to being fooled for entertainment. The magician creates a contract with the audience that makes the deception acceptable and celebrated. Contrast this with deception in personal relationships, where the lack of consent and transparency makes lying harmful to trust and intimacy. Business dealings similarly depend on good faith and honesty, with deception typically constituting fraud. Yet even here, we accept strategic ambiguity. Companies aren't expected to reveal their full negotiation strategies. What about matters of life and death? The British intelligence operation that planted false documents on a corpse required creating a fictional identity, crafting fake love letters, and manipulating neutral Spanish officials. Yet this elaborate deception saved countless Allied lives by redirecting German divisions away from Sicily. What makes one form of deception morally justifiable, while another represents a violation of trust? The answer emerges in examining both intent and consequences, creating an ethical framework more nuanced than simply declaring all deception wrong. A fundamental distinction exists between a con artist's motivation and a spy's objectives. Con artists pursue personal enrichment at others' expense. Their zero-sum game creates clear winners and losers. They profit because others suffer loss. The spy, operating in wartime, often aims to serve a larger purpose that may ultimately protect even those being deceived. Ian Fleming's Trout Memo in 1939 outlined 54 deception tactics that could be deployed against enemies. Trick number 28, involving planting misleading papers on a corpse, eventually became Operation Mincemeat. While clearly deceptive, this tactic aimed at shortening a devastating war, not personal gain. The haversack ruse represents a tactic employed throughout both world wars. These were calculated deceptions designed to achieve strategic military objectives with minimal bloodshed. The ethics become more compelling when we consider that successful deception operations often reduced casualties on both sides by preventing futile defensive actions. Is deception justified when it serves a greater good? Operation Mincemeat faced enormous challenges. The team needed to secure a suitable corpse, create a believable false identity, and ensure the Germans would find and believe the false documents. Their selection of Huelva, Spain as the drop location was strategic. chosen for its German consulate and pro-German Spanish military presence. The psychological principles underlying the operation were the same ones exploited by con artists, but directed toward preservation rather than exploitation, a distinction that matters profoundly in ethical evaluation. Consider the moral complexity of double agents like Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo. Garcia provided false information to the Germans about the D-Day invasion while secretly working for the Allies. His deception was so convincing that Germany awarded him the Iron Cross, while Britain made him a member of the Order of the British Empire, recognition from both sides for entirely different reasons. Garcia's actions involved betraying trust and lying repeatedly, yet helped ensure the success of the Normandy landings, potentially shortening the war by months and saving countless lives. The ethical calculus weighs the harm of deception against the greater harm of prolonged conflict. Societies develop different norms around acceptable versus unacceptable forms of deception. Because context matters, we accept that undercover police officers may need to conceal their identities to infiltrate criminal organizations. Military forces employ camouflage and disinformation to protect troops. We even accept certain forms of bluffing in competitive games like poker. What emerges is a framework for evaluating when deception might serve a greater good. This framework considers necessity. Could the goal be achieved without deception? Proportionality. Is the scale of deception justified by the outcome? And harm minimization. Does the deception prevent greater suffering? How do we reconcile deception with accountability? The most ethical deceptions typically include plans for eventual transparency. Military deceptions are declassified decades later. Undercover operations eventually conclude with court proceedings. Even Houdini revealed some of his methods to educate the public about fraudulent spiritualists. When examining influence operations targeting democratic societies, we see how similar psychological principles can be weaponized for manipulation rather than protection. The distinction lies in their application and purpose. Transparency eventually allows us to evaluate which deceptions served legitimate purposes and which merely exploited vulnerabilities. This ethical framework acknowledges the moral complexity of a world where sometimes protecting the truth requires concealing it temporarily. The key question becomes not, is deception wrong? But who does this deception serve? When deception primarily enriches the deceiver at others' expense, it fails ethical scrutiny. When it serves a larger purpose, benefiting even those being deceived, we enter territory where good faith arguments exist on both sides. Understanding these distinctions provides a framework for navigating modern dilemmas in cybersecurity, political messaging, and intelligence operations. Deception isn't inherently evil, but a tool whose morality depends on intentions and outcomes. Conclusion. Throughout history, the fundamental dynamics of deception have remained remarkably consistent. Whether we're examining Victor Lustig's audacious sale of the Eiffel Tower, or today's sophisticated cyber operations, the psychological principles at play are virtually identical. What's changed are merely the tools and platforms. This understanding offers us something far more valuable than techniques for manipulation. It provides a mirror reflecting our cognitive vulnerabilities, the shortcuts and biases hardwired into our thinking. With this self-awareness, we gain protection against deception while enhancing our decision-making, improving communication, and deepening our understanding of others. Timeless benefits in an ever-changing landscape of human interaction. Operation Mincemeat, the corpse that fooled Hitler. From selling the Eiffel Tower to fooling the Third Reich. What if the greatest deception of World War II wasn't carried out by a master spy, but by a dead man who never spoke a word? The same psychological triggers that made con artists successful were about to be deployed on a global scale. But instead of swindling a businessman out of money, This deception would aim to fool Hitler's entire intelligence apparatus with nothing more than a corpse, some fake documents, and an incredible backstory. In 1943, the Allies faced a critical problem. They needed to invade Sicily, the obvious stepping stone into mainland Europe. But the Germans knew this too. A frontal assault against prepared defenses would result in massive casualties. British intelligence needed to convince Hitler that the real invasion target was somewhere else entirely. But how do you fool the leader of the Third Reich and his entire military machine? The answer came from an unlikely source, a 1939 memo known as the Trout Memo, written by Naval Intelligence Director Rear Admiral John Godfrey and his assistant, a young lieutenant commander named Ian Fleming, who would later create James Bond. Among various deception tactics, they suggested planting misleading documents on a corpse. This idea, originally inspired by a 1937 novel, would become Operation Mincemeat, a deception so audacious it seemed destined to fail, yet one that might save thousands of lives. Two British intelligence officers, Charles Cholmondeley and Ewan Montagu, took on the impossible task. Their first challenge was finding a suitable body. They needed a young male corpse with no family to claim it. After a careful search, they found Glyndwr Michael, a Welsh homeless man who had died after ingesting rat poison. This anonymous man would become the centerpiece of a plan that could alter the course of the war. The intelligence team meticulously transformed this body into Captain Acting Major William Martin of the Royal Marines. They built his entire life through wallet litter, the everyday items a person carries that tell their story. Military historian Ben McIntyre describes the painstaking attention to detail. Major Martin carried ticket stubs from recent shows, keys, cigarettes, and even a stern letter from his bank manager about an overdraft. The team included a photograph of his fictional fiancée Pam, actually an MI5 clerk named Jean Leslie, love letters, a receipt for an engagement ring, and a letter from his father. Each item was carefully aged and weathered to create a believable history. The masterstroke was the official correspondence in Major Martin's briefcase. The team created a personal letter from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye to General Sir Harold Alexander that deliberately mentioned Allied plans to invade Greece and Sardinia, with Sicily described merely as a diversion. Another letter from Vice Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten introduced Major Martin as an amphibious landing expert and included a joking reference to sardines, a subtle nod to Sardinia that Montagu hoped German intelligence would interpret as significant.